Welcome to the January 2022 edition of CBAN Lunch and Learn. I'm Curtis Dean.
I'm Jon Anne Willow.
Todd Kielkopf.
And we're really excited to be back with you, a whole new year, and a lot of great things will be happening at CBAN this year. A little bit later on, we are going to have a very exciting conversation. A part of our CBAN Lunch and Learn series, we had a conversation with some people involved in America's libraries. We're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on those libraries across the United States and learn a little bit more about not only how COVID affected their operations, but how it's really kind of evolved their mission. And so that's coming up in the second part of our Lunch and Learn today. Starting off here today, though, we're going to talk a little bit about, playing off of the discussion with the libraries, Todd, how libraries have really had to step up because of connectivity issues that a lot of Americans have.
Yeah, they really do have the frontline exposure and frontline responsibility in the community to help people through their digital inclusion issues, whether that be access or whether that be adoption because of understanding, teaching and programming. They don't really have allies within the local government system typically for that digital role.
Yeah.
We don't see a lot of outreach between providers and libraries. There's not, even though there's with these new federal programs, this programs like SCORE have used libraries in the past to help people with tax returns, or people use those spaces in order to help educate society. And now we have these new programs where there really is a new roadmap for libraries to play that digital inclusion role in a new space, but they need a little help. And so that's maybe where CBAN and others can help raise that awareness about getting the various things put together.
Yeah. So let's talk. I'd like to follow up with you on something you pointed out, which is that in the past, private providers and libraries haven't had active partnerships, and now there may be new incentives for them to do so. And I know the answer is probably obvious, but what are your thoughts on why those partnerships haven't existed in the past? I'm asking that specifically because we have to build those bridges now.
Right.
So what was keeping them from existing before, do you think?
Well, the first thing is I think most of the providers are big enough that they just don't interact with their communities at all. They don't have community reps the way they used to say, well, what's the needs of my customers, and how do I find out where those needs are? And a lot of times, in my experience working in local government, it's been a race to the bottom of funding. You don't have people at the library that are technically hired to go out and solve a problem. They're there to manage, the things that are walking in the door, and that's the best that they've ever been funded. It would take a rather proactive approach. I remember when I was working for the library system in Columbia, Missouri, which is a growing city. It was growing from 75 to 125,000 people, 5 colleges. And the internet was first coming around. And one of our biggest things was, of course, everybody said, libraries need no more space, kill the library. Well, now we wanted a $22 million expansion because we needed spaces for people to meet because the internet was coming. And the schools didn't know how to, do that. And so we just saw that there was a big gap between policymakers and the understanding and just the feeling that libraries were going to become irrelevant. I just don't think providers, saw themselves as part of the solution.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think providers, and again, we're talking mostly larger providers and providers that don't have a community link, have just seen the libraries as another customer and treating them as another customer, even though the library is going to have very limited resources financially in many cases because policymakers don't give them enough money. I remember one time at a community that we were involved in a study, and I was talking to the library director, and they only had 3 megabits per second internet download speeds to serve their entire library. And I said, well, that's probably not adequate. Well, yeah, we know it's not adequate. We can't afford anything more than that with the prices that were being presented. So it's a challenge. It really is.
Well, that actually is kind of a great segue. So we have the new Affordable Connectivity Program that is a transition from the emergency broadband benefit. We have, I think we all can agree that there's a lack of awareness on the part of the public, but also that just ties into to all of the digital literacy concerns, including those that the library is trying to address. So it'll be interesting to see if this affordable connectivity program can somehow be leveraged by the libraries, especially since it's such a good deal for the providers. There's no reason for them not to participate.
Absolutely. When I was having my conversation with the libraries, library directors, they were expressing concern about that maybe first the emergency broadband benefit fund that this grew out of, and now the ACP, is that maybe there hasn't been that kind of all hands on deck approach to educating consumers about it. Because if you look at like the emergency broadband benefit, which was the precursor to the ACP that we're talking about here, the EBB enrollment rates were not even close to being a majority of people that were eligible, or households that were eligible. And obviously, I think I called them low information consumers. There are a lot of people out there, they're just too busy working 2 full-time minimum wage jobs to deal with researching and figuring this out. So you really have to come up with new ways to get this information in front of people. And that's on everybody, right? That should be on the providers.
Right. I was going to say, do you think that the providers will step up and take a broader role in getting people enrolled in this?
Well, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
I've had a conversation with a couple of providers, smaller providers, right? And they did not participate in the emergency broadband benefit fund.
Okay.
Now, some of them didn't because I think a very good reason. They were really concerned. They knew that was going to be a limited time offer. And they were really concerned about, well, if I enroll in this, I'm going to get a bunch of people that couldn't afford internet before. They're going to get signed on. This benefit's going to go away. And I can't keep subsidizing it off of my own bottom line. Therefore, the rate's going to go back up and I'm going to look like the bad guy.
Right.
So they wanted to wait for something more permanent. Well, now we have a permanent program, but we're still seeing some resistance from some providers. And what one provider told me is, I don't have the time to deal with the paperwork. I think that's not a good attitude, especially if you're focused on consumer services, if you're focused on your community and doing what's best. And really, if you want to grow in some small communities, that's the only way you're going to grow, because the community is not adding a bunch of houses every day. So you don't have a whole lot of new customers coming on board. So you need to grow by getting more of your own citizens, your own residents, your own customer base to adopt. And this is one thing that goes toward improving adoption, is affordability. So I'm just going to kind of march through the Affordable Connectivity Program for just a moment here, because it's there's a great website that the FCC has posted, acpbenefit.org. We're looking at it more from the consumer standpoint right now. And the Affordable Connectivity Program information available here. Consumers can go to acpbenefit.org. They can see if their provider is enrolled and is participating. If their provider isn't, they have the opportunity to see if there is another provider in their area that is participating. But the enrollment process, basically, the consumer goes to ACP Benefit, they submit an application, or they can print a mail-in application. Now, key question: how do I enroll for this if I don't have internet at home? Well, that's one of the things.
Actually, not that well managed, is it, Curtis?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that we talked about with the libraries. They are being active, at least the ones I talked to, in helping people enroll. In fact, somebody comes in and, welcome to the library. Hey, do you have internet at home? We'd love you here, but we can help you get connected at home if you don't have a home connection. So, so those are ways that again, that outreach is needed, and community action agencies are going to hopefully be involved in promoting this program, obviously providers, et cetera. So what is the benefit of the program? Well, the big one is there's a $30 a month discount for internet service for qualifying households. The qualifications now are a little broader than they were under the Emergency Broadband Benefit Fund, which is great. Hopefully we'll get more people involved. It's also broader than the old Universal Service Fund, the Lifeline program that was designed back in the day to subsidize low-income households for telephone service.
And that benefit, even so, is under $20 a month, right?
Yes, the old the Lifeline was, I think, $9.75.
Yeah.
So this is a much larger benefit. It's permanently funded from appropriations from Congress. It's $30 a month unless you live in a qualified tribal land, and tribal lands often are very underserved. So $75 a month discount up to for those households should go a long way toward getting connectivity to those tribal lands. Now, one of the problems with connectivity at home is, okay, great, I can afford the internet now. I have nothing to use the internet on. I don't have a device, or have a limited number of devices and I need more. Well, there is a one-time discount for a laptop, desktop computer, or a tablet. It has to be purchased through the participating provider. That provider needs to participate in that piece of it, because the provider could choose to do the monthly subsidy, but not do the device subsidy. And one of the challenges with this, as we were talking about earlier, is $100 doesn't go a long way.
No, and there's an additional, actually, what makes it even more restrictive than the fact that it's only 100% discount, $100 discount, is that the consumer is not allowed to contribute more than $50.
More than $50.
And they can't contribute less than 10.
Yeah.
So they have to have an item that specifically costs between $110 and $150.
Pretty restrictive.
You can't have $100 off a $200 item.
Correct.
And that really limits the pot. That really limits the universe of available connected devices that are useful to people in their homes.
It does. And it also it puts pressure on providers. If they wanted to, they certainly could subsidize that more. But most providers are not going to be in a position to give a $100 subsidy that they won't get reimbursed for a device in order to get a good device in the home. So
right.
That's
and really, if we just think about capitalism, what's their incentive to lose $100 or lose some money on a connected device for an already subsidized account that,
exactly.
I feel like I almost wish that piece wasn't even in there. It's so insufficient. It will be so underutilized, and I'm glad they got something in for the first round. Maybe in future appropriations, we can improve that benefit.
And if you look at the providers that have already been signed up for and authorized for the connectivity program, I would say a majority are not participating in that piece because of the difficulty of finding that sweet spot for a device that's actually useful for $110 to $150.
Right.
So the criteria are listed here. And again, go to ACP, to the website acpbenefit.org to get all the information. But like I mentioned, the eligibility requirements are looser on this than they are for other programs. So you could qualify automatically by being participating in SNAP, Medicaid, federal housing assistance, etc. Or you can, even if you don't participate in those, if you can show that you have a below 200% of the federal poverty line. Now,
will people still be able to take advantage of Lifeline side by side with the ACP?
That is a question that I don't know that I have the answer for, and that's
I wasn't able to find it clearly either. I did look for it, and I wasn't able to.
Yeah, because
so
the original idea was the FCC was going to change the Lifeline from a telephone benefit to a internet benefit, and that was kind of in the works. And then they shifted to this. So I'm not sure on Lifeline.
Well, we'll make a note and answer that in a future broadcast.
Yeah. And if somebody's watching this today and they have the answer, just type it in the comments and we'll be glad to follow up with it. So those are the qualifying benefits. And again, the acpbenefit.org is the website that will point people to learn more about it. I'm sure we're going to be talking more about this as the year goes on, because it's just a really important topic. And in fact, one of the things I learned is the FCC is making their FCC experts available for presentations and events and that sort of thing. So who knows, we may be talking to someone from the FCC to hopefully explain it in non-government speak. That would be very nice.
That would be
all
super.
right. Well, we'll be, like I said, we'll be talking about more about the American Connectivity or Affordable Connectivity Program as time goes on. But right now, we want to turn to our conversation about the impact of COVID-19 on America's libraries. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on all aspects of not just American lives, but the lives of all humans on this planet. And we're going to be talking about one particular impact. This is kind of a niche, but it's a very important niche, because America's libraries have always played a vital role in our livelihoods and our lives. And it's becoming even more important in this day and age. So we're going to be talking specifically about the impact of COVID-19 on America's libraries. And we've got a great panel here of people to talk about that today. So I just want to go through and introduce each of our panelists. First of all, I'd like to introduce you first to Natalie. Natalie Caula-Hauff is Caula-Hauff is Deputy Director of Innovation with the Charleston County, South Carolina Public Library. So, Natalie, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Another library director from a smaller community we have on today, and that's Joan Grothoff. She's the director of the Eldora, Iowa Public Library. Welcome, Joan. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And finally, someone who can help us with kind of a 30,000-foot overview from the perspective of the American Library Association, Public Library Association. This is Larra Clark, and she's the deputy director in both the PPA office and the Public Library Association. So, Larra, thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody.
You bet. Well, there's a lot to talk to you about today, so I want to dive right in with what I think is a very interesting report. I'm putting this link up on the screen right now that the American Library Association did. It's actually was done last year, but it was talking about the state of Americans' libraries in 2021, and it was specific to the impact on COVID. There's a great quote in that report that I read, which is, "Buildings may not have been open, but libraries were never closed." And I want to kind of start there, because each of your organizations or your public libraries had impacts from COVID. And I want to talk about, first of all, what were those operational impacts? Maybe I'll start with you, Joan. What kind of impacts did you see on like operating hours? Did you guys have to close down completely for a period of time? Talk a little bit about what you saw the impact there in Eldora.
Okay, it was March 16th. The mayor put a proclamation in that we would be closing all city buildings. So I did some brain work, and I thought right away, we're going to stay here and we're going to offer curbside service. So I immediately, myself and my assistant director, we're in library every day. The library is closed to the public, but we had people call in, we had people reserve online. So people did have access to the library the whole time.
That's fantastic. And same with you. I'll throw the question to you, Natalie. You guys probably had to shut down and then go through the process of, okay, how do we keep doing what libraries do, even though the building's locked up?
We did, and we cover such a huge geographic area in Charleston County. I feel like we had these additional challenges, so we did have to shut down. And first and foremost, we wanted to make sure our staff, because I think a lot of people don't think about broadband and connectivity when it comes to their own staff, that they were able to connect so they could continue providing the work we needed to do. So we did a quick survey, and we found, a significant proportion of our staff needed either a device or Wi-Fi device. And so we used our MiFi devices that we had available for checkout. We collected our Chromebooks and our laptops and got those out to the staff, as well as purchasing some cell phones so that we could continue providing our Ask a Question librarian services remotely from our library staff's homes. So that happened within a matter of days, and it really was a huge pivot, but it occurred really successfully. We did did not get curbside up and running until we closed about mid-March, but we got it up and running in about June, and then reopened in some form or fashion in August. Everything we did was really in stages and kind of testing the waters. But one of the other things that I think is really important, especially when talking about broadband, was keeping the Wi-Fi operating outside of our buildings. And so we have a really close relationship with our local school district. And one of the things that they mentioned and talked to us about right after the closure was the fear of the lack of connectivity with our students that use our libraries. So what we did is we kept the Wi-Fi operating, but then beyond that, because of course, what good is it if no one knows, is we communicated that through the normal traditional promotional aspects of media and online. But, you know, of course, if it's online and you don't have online access, you have this barrier. And so we decided to do a mailing, and we using some of our marketing funds, thanks to our friends of our library that provide funding for that kind of thing, we were able to send out a mass mailer so that people were aware that those that the internet was still on and you could come to our parking lot. We even had security rotating among the branches to ensure that they felt safe in doing that. And in the first couple of weeks, we had 1,000 connections to our Wi-Fi at our 18 locations.
Wow. I'm glad you brought that up, because we all know that broadband is still a big challenge as far as getting broadband to the end user, whether it be that residential customer that has 3 kids in school, or maybe an adult learner, or maybe somebody just looking for a job. Even before COVID, I had heard stories about how libraries were serving that important role of connecting the unconnected through parking lot Wi-Fi hotspots and that sort of thing. So that just grew during COVID, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
So when you look at that, what kind of challenges did that present to you? Were there operational challenges there, like security? You mentioned having actual security people that would be able to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate going on in the parking lot while people are parked out there doing their homework and whatever. But did you have any concerns about, additional security on your network itself?
Not the network itself, I'm sure, although I'm sure our IT department was aware of keeping that, keeping tabs on that. But really the biggest thing was the security physically in place. And, that was a real scenario that we brought up, but you have to weigh the risk versus the reward. And, we couldn't disconnect people like that. Yeah. And so, yes, it was a concern. We were really worried about, especially at night. But we did the best we could with taking the contract that we have with our security guards and just amending it and pivoting and having them rotate. And our branch managers, leaning on them to tell us about where are people going to be most affected. And let's just make sure that we're getting the security needed where it's needed. So really relying on the branch managers knowing their communities. And that's one of the things that I think stood out about COVID is how embedded library staff are in the communities they serve.
That's a great point.
They're just like, libraries have become community hubs beyond, checkouts of materials. And our branch managers are known in their community. So really relying on them and their expertise was a huge benefit. And so any risks or fears we might have had were really mitigated by that.
Joan, you don't have to worry about branch managers. You're in a small town. You have one library. Do you feel at all that maybe COVID-19 made people appreciate their public library a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Actually, I'm in a town of like 2,500 people, maybe 2,600, and people realized, they needed other sources. So they needed the Wi-Fi. So we kept that on. They needed information. This is maybe jumping, but when we were finally able to get the vaccine, people didn't have access to, getting the internet to get vaccines. I can't tell you how many vaccine appointments I made for elderly people that didn't have a computer. I mean, It's just, they knew that they needed us, and we did everything we could to support the community, leaving our Wi-Fi on. We don't have to worry about security, but we again left our Wi-Fi on. And I had so many people tell me throughout these years, the library saved me during COVID, even though it's still going on. But during the thick of it, when it was new, we saved them because they had access to books, to internet, to things that they wouldn't have had if we weren't available to them.
And Joan made a really good point about the community leveraging our ability to provide that connectivity. So we partnered with our county when the funding came out for COVID relief for rental assistance. They wanted to ensure that especially those without access to internet had the ability to apply for this funding. We had millions of dollars from the U.S. Treasury provided to the county, but without that connectivity, how would they do that? And not just connectivity, but also just the literacy of comprehension of being able to apply for those applications were very complicated. So we partnered with the county and we provided one-on-one appointments where we would sit, our library staff would sit with individuals who wanted to apply, and we would help them get through the application, upload documents. We waived all fees for copies and our scanner use so they could upload what they needed and apply for those funds. And I feel like that was such a huge moment of showing impact, because I'm sure that everyone here will agree that libraries are one of the most underrated resources in this country. And yes. I feel like, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like not only our elected officials, but our community leaders all were able to recognize the power of the library and the impact it had. And we were so happy to be there and show what we could do, and we did.
So with that,